shame. How we break each other's hearts and cause each other pain. How we take each other's love.
Right, we lived in 12 Arnold Grove. It was a 2 up and 2 down. The only heating was a coal fire, so there was no electricity. Small backyard toilet down the bottom of the yard. It was a very cold place.
What kind of kid was George?
He was cocky, a cocky little guy. He had a good sense of himself. You know, he wasn't cowed by anything. He had a great haircut. He had this long hair that he quiffed back. We had a friend, Arthur, and he used to describe it as a f***ing turban, like a f***ing turban. And it did. They looked like a quite big, marvellous thing.
When I was still at school and I was really small, I know John was really embarrassed because I was so tiny. I only looked about 10 years old.
When I met John, he had 4 strings on this guitar. I mean, John didn't even know guitars had 6 strings. I was saying, what are you doing? What's that? And he was saying, well, you know what? You know, he thought that's what it was. So we showed John the guitar chords, E and A and all those. My mother was a real big fan of music, and she was really happy about having the guys around. You know, and John was always keen to get out of his house because of his Aunt Mimi was kind of very stern and strict, and she embarrassed him. I remember going to John's house once when I first had met him. I was still at the Institute. We were trying to look like Teddy Boys, which was like that style in those days. And I must have looked pretty good because she was like, she didn't like me at all. She was really shocked. She said, look at him, you know, who is this? Bringing this boy around to this house. You look at him, he looks dreadful, like a teddy boy. And he'd just say, shut up, Murray, shut up.
George, only a brief document or 2 left.
For the record, I'd just like to say these are more papers that I don't know what they say.
Any of these?
But I'm
Yes, always.
John Winston. No, no, Richard Starkey.
All right.
Or John Lennon, or George Harrison. Krishna. May the Lord help this to become final.
The small gathering on Savile Row is only the beginning. The event is so momentous that historians may one day view it as a landmark in the decline of the British Empire. The Beatles are breaking up.
I'd like to know where you were when John Lennon died.
I was in bed.
I wondered what you felt, losing someone who's close to you for all those years.
It's like losing your parents or anybody you know and love. You know, all things must pass, but when it's taken in a violent way like that by somebody else, you know, it makes it very strange. He was very good. He was very good, and he was, in some ways, he was a slight genius. I mean, but apart from that, he was still just some guy like the rest of everybody else.
He was no angel.
He wasn't, but he was as well.
Was he?
Yeah. It may sound like a lofty thing to say on VH1, but basically, you know, what are we doing on this planet? I think through the Beatle experience that we'd grown so many years within a short period of time. I'd experienced so many things and met so many people, but I realized there was nothing actually that was giving me a buzz anymore. I wanted something better. I remember thinking, I'd love to meet somebody who will really impress me.
In your house? Yes. Really first time you have seen? Yes. I've just seen the photographs before. We saw there are many places which didn't turn out to be the one. village is also nice.
Yeah.
I'm walking very morning.
Perfect.
Sometimes you're chanting Hare Krishna. Yes. Hare Krishna.
I seem to keep going in cycles.
Huh?
I go around in circles. Maybe it's something to do with me being, the Pisces, they show one fish going this way and one fish going that way. And periods when I just can't stop chanting. And then other periods where, I turn into a demon again and forget.
You are not demon. You are demigod. Somewhere or other you have got attached to Krishna. That will help you.
I mean, even at my worst, I can always...
Srimad Bhagavatam you are reading?
Pardon?
Srimad Bhagavatam you are reading?
I'm reading the Gita.
Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
Yes, that is... All answers are there.
And it goes, just read it over and over, just one piece over and over.
Whatever action is performed by a great man, common men follow in his footsteps, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues.
So, this is your duty now. By the grace of Krishna, you are one of the great men, although you are a young man. But Krishna has placed you in such a high position that there are many young men who follow you. So that is the instruction. So this record album, I am in the material world, and I heard that has been appreciated by so many people. Even one teacher was telling me.
So one teacher came to visit Prabhupada. He said he played your record in his classroom. He teaches religious education. And they were astounded that the children, one of them began to pray. When he found one boy in a room alone playing the record and praying on the floor.
There's one song in particular which was directly the result of the conversation we had when you came.
Yes, in your house. Yes.
About fame and fortune and...
So how the record is now received?
Yes.
Then?
Yes.
The people are seeking after something, our spiritual enlightenment, that's a fact. Especially in the Western world. That is a fact.
Well, if you think since 65, just less than 8 years, and if you came with $5 or $10, and now it's so big, the organization.
Yes.
I mean, think of another 5 years, the potential. Then that is what people will have to, just the growth and the success is, you don't need any other reason for people to, have the jealousy or...
Well, yes, people say very nicely, in Africa, and especially Europe and America, the younger generation, they are liking.
Just by your words, just the words that you gave us, those words have created all.
That is not my word, that is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's word.
I became quite friendly at one point with Swami Bhaktivedanta, who formed the Krishna temple. But, they'd call me up and say, come to the temple, the Swami's here and he'd love to see you. And I'd be like going through some private nightmare or something, and I think, how can I go to the temple? And I'm like this. But then I'd go, and I'd always walk out of there thinking, oh, thank you, Lord.
I think that chanting helped George a lot overcome feelings of distress and anger. He once said to me, George once said that once you start chanting, you don't want to stop. I think that he was very attached to the chanting and also to people like myself who were of his age and who were on a spiritual path. Sometimes I called him a closet Krishna because he didn't shave his head, he didn't wear robes.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
He wanted to make an album for the Radha Krishna temple. All of these people in their white robes, bald heads, going around hitting the Indian bells, just trying to, at times, record all of them, with them sort of not necessarily keeping still all the time, and some of the weird instruments that were being brought in to be recorded. It was absolutely fascinating.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
I remember hearing it on a car radio somewhere in the east part of East London, and the disc jockey saying that was a song by a group of bald-headed Americans. George said about taking on this project himself, recording the devotees singing the Hare Krishna mantra, was that he wanted to get across what he believed through a medium that he was familiar with, and that was chanting. That was a 45 record. And it was quite amazing because myself and none of us thought that this was going to be a popular record, and yet it became very popular. It was played in the intermission at the Isle of Wight concert that when Bob Dylan was setting up, and it was played at the intermission in a football game in Manchester, where Manchester United was a very popular soccer team. And all the fans, who were probably just there to watch the soccer, started singing along with it because it was only 3 words and they could all do it. And there were 5,000 football fans singing Hare Krishna.
I woke up, I just heard smashing of glass. I jumped up, I woke up George. It must have been about 4:30 in the morning. And I said, somebody's smashed a window. And he said, how do you know? I said, I heard it. So he jumped up, and I ran to the door, and I locked the door. And he said, why are you locking the door? I said, why? Because I'm afraid. That's why I'm locking the door. He said, no, I'm going out there. And so he ran downstairs, which he really didn't have to do, but he felt he had to do because my mother was upstairs, and he didn't want, he didn't know if she was okay.
He was very, very badly attacked, and by the time he died, he didn't even have a single scar on him. I mean, he was like a yogi. He moved on from that physically and mentally, and didn't let it affect him. But it definitely took years off his life, So if you're trying to fight cancer and then you're trying to stay alive for something like that, it's got to take it out of you,
The last weeks of George's life, he was in Switzerland, and I went to see him, and he was very ill, and he could only lay down. And while he was being ill, and I'd come to see him, I was going to Boston because my daughter had a brain tumor, and I said, well, I've got to go. I've got to go to Boston, and he goes. It was the last words I heard him say, actually. And he said, do you want me to come with you? Oh, God. So, that's the incredible side of George.
There was a profound experience that happened when he left his body. It was visible. Let's just say you wouldn't need to light the room if you were trying to film it. He just lit the room.
I had an experience which speeds up the whole idea of you know, if you have something happen to you physically, then, you know, people can go in hospital or have something wrong with them and, you know, have a shock or something like that. And then you think, wow, yeah, I could be dying now. Now, if I was dying now, what would I think? What would I miss? If I had to leave my body, you know, in an hour's time, what is it that I would miss? And I think, well, I've got a son who needs a father, so I have to stick around for him as long as I can. But other than that, I can't think of much reason to be here.